is coming my way. Wherever I go, hard luck is there to stay. Good luck never stays a day. Bad luck's always coming my way.
It is another hot day here in Florida, and today we find ourselves in Winter Park visiting one of the oldest colleges in Florida. Established in 1885, we're at Rollins College seeking out Mr. Rogers' neighborhood here in Florida.
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? It's a neighborly day in this beauty wood, a neighborly day for a beauty. Would you be mine? Could you be mine?
Now you may be asking yourself, why on earth are we in Florida seeking out locations for a Pittsburgh legend? Well, he went to school here, he met his wife here, he retired here, and the college, Rollins College, has a bunch of different things dedicated to him. A walking tour, which is what brings us here today. Now I know what you're thinking, why is Mr. Rogers on the Grimm Life Collective's YouTube channel? Well, you know the famous horror director George Romero, who directed Night of the Living Dead, Creepshow, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead? Well, Mr. Rogers gave him his first directing paying role in an episode from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood called Mr. Rogers Gets a Tonsillectomy.
One time I went to the hospital to have an operation in our neighborhood hospital. Would you like to see what I remember about the time I went to the hospital?
Strange, right? Actually, George Romero said it was one of the scariest things he ever directed. Not because of the content, but because he was so nervous, because it was his first time and he didn't want to screw it up. Rollins College is really doing an awesome thing by providing this tour, well, a self-guided tour for free of the campus. It says the Rollins College Mr. Rogers Neighborhood Tour, and there are 4 locations on the map that you can walk to. The campus ain't that big, so let's get going. Our first location on our walking tour is the Fred Rogers Lobby in the concert hall. It's a giant painting of the man himself. It seems like I never get tired of looking at the Spanish moss. Maybe it's Savannah inside me speaking out, but I love it. There's no Spanish moss down in Orlando, but every town outside of Orlando has it. Yeah. Not sure how to pronounce it, but our first stop is inside the John M. Tedke Concert Hall. Jessica's on her way. Since this is a college campus, school is going on, classes are going on, so we're gonna have to try to be as quiet as possible, as non-evasive as possible. Beautiful place. Now we had to find our way through the building because these doors that are over here to the left that we were trying to come in were locked. And the painting of Mr. Rogers is right here. It's a very simple painting, but it's the first stop on the walking tour. Fred Rogers in his sweater and his tennis shoes. That's so cool. And just like the name states, the Fred Rogers Plaza and Lobby, the plaza is right outside this building here. Very nice. I'm not sure if you can hear the music that's going on behind me because this is an actual music building. A bunch of college kids learning how to play their instruments. It actually kind of sounds pretty cool. Jessica says it sounds like television music. Listen.
So Mr. Rogers is actually one of the forefathers of petitioning for keeping funding in public broadcasting for education to children. In 1969, he went before the American Senate on communications and pleaded the case. And he made a very compelling case. You can actually watch the video of his testimony, and that was like a big win for public broadcasting for funding.
This college reminds me of an old Spanish missionary. Our second stop is to the right of the chapel here at Rollins College. And this beautiful building right here was the dormitory of Mr. Rogers whenever he was here attending college. Just check out this beautiful entranceway. So supposedly you can take a boat tour and they stop at a mansion that they say was Mr. Rogers whenever he was here, and that a family, his family, was so wealthy that they bought him a mansion when he attended college. That seems a little bit weird. But according to the college, this was his dormitory. And God darn it, It's beautiful. The college here did something that I actually find really, really neat. They have something called the Walk of Fame. And Mr. Rogers has a spot on this Walk of Fame. At first glance, the Walk of Fame here may seem a little crude, but it's actually really neat. All of these stones are from places in these famous people's lives. Here's a stone for William Shakespeare from the Trinity Church Tower. This one's a little washed out, but there's one for Helen Keller. Oh man, this is really cool. This stone is from the birthplace of Charles Dickens. Here's a stone for the Wright brothers. This is awesome. This one says from the tomb of Increase Mather and his son Cotton Mather from Boston, Massachusetts. A couple months ago we did a video on the Hard Rock Cafe and we showed a stone from the Berlin Wall. This one here is from the Great Wall of China. This one's from Vienna. It's Ludwig van Beethoven. Check that out. Cleopatra from Egypt. And there's a stone for Washington Irving, the writer of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. The Temple of Poseidon from Greece. Oh wow, check that out. Ramses II from Egypt. There's a stone from the Garden of the Imperial Palace in Tokyo, right there in the center of the screen. Oh wow. It's from Solomon's Cave, Damascus, Jerusalem. I think this one's my second favorite one aside from Washington Irving, P.T. Barnum, 1810 to 1891. This one's cracked, but that's the Valley of the Kings in Egypt. And there it is, the stone for Fred McFeely Rogers, 1951, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. What I find really interesting, and I didn't know this, was Mr. Rogers' middle name was Mr. McFeely. Well, not Mr. McFeely. Mr. McFeely was the postman in the TV show Mr. Rogers, but I had no idea that his middle name was McFeely. That's really cool. I had no clue. What do you think, Jessica? Do you have a favorite Walk of Fame stone here?
Not of any person, but there's a lot here that are from famous locations, and there's one that's, you know, from Zeus Mount Olympus in Greece, from the Imperial Garden in Tokyo, lots of Athens, Greece, and Italy. It's cool to see little pieces of actual factual history, even, well, maybe not Zeus, but Mount Olympus.
The map of this place is a bit confusing, but we did finally find the library. This place is absolutely beautiful. It kind of reminds me of like a Spanish missionary. Right here inside the library doors they have a bust of Edgar Allan Poe, and perched on top is a black bird. Is that a raven? Years ago during a road trip I stopped at the Edgar Allan Poe Museum in Richmond, Virginia, and they had a bust just like this. I wonder if that one was the original. Alright, now I feel like I'm in the movie Ghostbusters. I'm in the library and I found a ghost. What we came here for in the library is not on permanent display, but instead, it's down here at the end of this hall in the archives. It's usually not kept out, but the folks here at the Rollins College library were kind enough to take these out of the archives for us so we can take a look at them. This right here is one of Mr. Rogers' sweaters. That's so cool. As tempted as I am to touch it and want to put it on, I'm not going to do that. When they brought it out, they were wearing white gloves. They don't keep it out too much because the light is bad for it. But that there is a wonderful piece of history. And right next to it are a pair of his shoes. You can see them in that photograph right there. Scroll back a little bit. There's his blue shoes. And right there on the soles, you can see he signed them. That's amazing. Now it's a little hard to see, but right there on the sole it says these sneakers helped to make many Mr. Rogers neighborhood television visits. There's a little tag here that says please do not touch, and that Mr. Rogers' sweaters were made for him by his mother, Nancy McFeely Rogers Flagg. Over here in the corner on permanent display, it looks like, is a glass case with some Mr. Rogers memorabilia. There's a picture from his graduation in 1951. Beautiful photo of his wife. Oh, now that's cool. It's 1949 Halloween contest. Mr. Rogers and his wife won. A little hard to see, but there's a picture from 1991 whenever Mr. Rogers was getting his stone put on the Walk of Fame. Also in 1991, here's a photo of him visiting the college's Child Development Center. Man, he loved children. Everything he did was pretty awesome. And here is a handwritten note from the man himself from whenever he donated one of his sweaters here to the college in 1991. His handwriting is actually very nice. I kind of felt like we were in the movie A Quiet Place. I feel like I couldn't be quiet enough. I've never been that quiet inside of a library. What do you think, Jessica?
Libraries are like naturally soundproofed. If you make the slightest little noise at all, you're like,
But wasn't seeing his sweater and his shoes really cool?
so cool.
Very cool. That's a piece of history right there.
Yeah.
A piece of our childhood. So awesome. Let's go on to the next one, the fourth stop on this walking tour. Now I know this has nothing to do with the Addams family, but can you just imagine if Pugsley went to school here and they named this building after him? Our last stop on our walking tour is this building here, Strong Hall. Somewhere around the facade is an engraving in marble that kind of became Mr. Rogers' mantra, if you will, something he lived by his entire life. As small as this campus is, it's actually pretty massive. I mean, we're kind of lost just walking around looking for this place, and it's kind of hard to believe that this is a college campus, that these buildings right here are dormitories. They look like something out of some sort of Spanish mansion. But the plaque we're looking for is an inscription in marble that says, "Life is service." Asked a few different people, and actually nobody knew what we were talking about. Weird. I will give it this, the walkways here, this is a beautiful place to get lost in. To be honest, this was quite hard to find, but this slogan right here, "Life is for service," Mr. Rogers kept it with him his entire life. I mean, literally. Mr. Rogers was known to have a photo of this in his wallet, and he carried it with him his entire life. Life is service. He lived his life for the community, to help people out, loved kids, had a great show. This is it. This pretty much is where it all began, back whenever Mr. Rogers attended college here.
Yeah.
It's crazy, right?
His life to education.
Yeah, he dedicated his entire life to education. He met his wife here on this campus. He came back to this area of Winter Garden after he retired. He spent so much of his time here.
There's a
It's
quote
awesome.
here that says, "Some of the most endearing friendships I have in this life began at Rollins. Talk about a nurturing neighborhood. For me, Rollins was just the right place to learn and to grow." He said that in 1951.
Out of everything here on the walking tour, that was probably the hardest thing to find, the "Life is service." Probably the coolest thing too. Not many people knew about it. It wasn't in the open, it was kind of hidden, almost like it was
Very
underneath the
hidden.
steps. Yeah, very hidden.
It's like in the middle of the hall, which is really dormitories, so long hallways that break off
Right.
and then go different directions. We were walking in from the back trying to find it towards the front and just happened upon it.
Very cool. So happy that they have this little walking tour. And it's free, so if you do
It's
find
cool,
yourself
yeah.
in Winter Garden and you do want to take the tour, even if you're not a Mr. Rogers fan, it's a beautiful place to go and visit. So stop on by Rollins College.
Wherever I come, bad luck is coming my way. Wherever I go, hard luck is there to stay. Good luck never stays a day. Bad luck's always coming my way.